literacy. So we will jump right in. So as was mentioned, there are numerous people here today. We're all from UNC Charlotte Atkins Library, and we all use she, her pronouns. I won't go through all of our names again, but we'll introduce ourselves as we speak. I'm Kristen Lamkowski, and I'm going to start us off today with a little introduction. We just heard about some of the etiquette, and we would like to encourage everybody to please go ahead and use chat as much as you would like during all of our presentation today. We, in preparation for this, realized that we had a lot of information that we wanted to share with everybody and that we might not be able to devote quite as much time for the Q&A as we had originally thought. So we really want you to be able to share your thoughts as we're going along, ask questions, and we'll be replying in the chat. We're all going to kind of keep an eye on it. And then we'll also try to save some time at the end for questions and loop back to any that we haven't gotten to. And we also encourage you to respond to each other in the chat. We have learned a lot by working together, and we know that some of you here probably have some great experiences that you could share as well, and we look forward to learning from you as well as people learning from us today. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a couple of questions here for you to think about and keep in mind kind of as we go through our presentation today. Think about what you think the most important things for visual literate students are to understand, and then think about some non-traditional approaches that you might implement if you have already done so, or if you come up with any that we talk about today. So what is visual literacy? Just like literacy is being able to read words and understand them, visual literacy is being able to look at images and understand them. So if you've ever looked into this, or if you do a quick Google of visual literacy, you might come up with some images like this one. It sort of breaks down some different components of visual literacy, and you might come across ones that are even more complicated than this one, with more components, more things branching out, more and more ideas to include in your visual literacy. Or if you're like us and you work in an academic library, you've probably seen the ACRL visual literacy competencies. There are the bullets here that I'll let you take a look at. And if you go to the ACRL website and take a look at these, you will see that there are even more parts underneath each of these bullets and outcomes that ACRL recommends to guide instruction in visual literacy. So if you're like me and you looked at these competencies and you looked at the visualization that I just showed, you might feel overwhelmed and you might feel like there's so much to cover when it comes to visual literacy. So part of what we want to do today is help you feel confident in being able to teach this skill to your students and to also develop the skill yourself. So I like to think about this as three parts to teaching visual literacy. These are different levels that sort of build on top of each other. So for part one, our basic first level, we want students to be able to find images and see what's in them, be able to describe them. We want them to look at an image and know what's there. And we also want them to know where to go to find images. Maybe you have databases available that students can use. Maybe you just want to show them how to find them online. But this is a point when you can also talk about copyright and permissions. So it's not okay to just use any image in any way, and we'll get into that some more. But this is the level where you can talk to students about how to find images and how to start using them. Then the intermediate level is thinking about evaluating and interpreting those images. So we don't just want students to look at the image and take them at face value. We want them to dig a little bit deeper and see what the meaning might be behind there. Evaluate the image, how well is it conveying the ideas that you think it's trying to convey, and also think about the source of the image, who created it and why, because as we probably know, all images aren't created equal. And then finally, we want students to understand the creation process. We want students to know not just who made this image, but we want them to know why they made it, for what purposes, and how they went about making it. Was this photo staged by an artist, or was it taken by a photojournalist? Was an image created for informational purposes or propaganda? Is this an original image, or did the creator build off of an already existing image? Understanding the way that the image was created will help our students get to thinking about the impact of an image, and it'll also get towards the ethics and the social impact related to images and using images in their work. And it'll give them an idea about how to start creating their own images in effective ways. So again, it probably still seems like a lot, and if you're like us and you have a lot of 50-minute classes that you're teaching, it can be hard to feel like you can fit all of that information into a 50-minute class. But if you structure things well, you can include a lot. And so that's why I'm saying here, I'm encouraging you that sometimes more is more. So go ahead and put everything that you can into there. And if you structure it well, the students will get a lot out of it. But how do you go about doing that? One great way that we have is we have used collaboration. We're big on collaboration at Atkins Library, and here are some of the reasons why. We're not all experts. We don't all know everything about everything, but we probably know somebody who has some knowledge that fills in our gaps. So we can pull in our other librarians to help us with that. Also, we have limited time, but we want to get the students as much as we can out of the library. So bringing in other librarians in other areas will show the students all of the resources they have, both in libraries and in the librarians and in the resources that the library offers. And then it gives us also new ways to present info and new tools that another librarian might use that we had never thought of. So you can start doing collaboration by just reaching out to your fellow librarians. Just reach out to somebody else in a different department or in a different subject area. Or if that's not sufficient for you, we have done brainstorming sessions. And so my colleague, Beth, is going to jump in here to give us an example of one of those sessions.
All right, hey everybody, I'm Beth Caruso, and I am, Kristen, you can go to the slide. I am one of the librarians that works with Area 49, which is the collection of the library's innovation resources and spaces. I work specifically with the Makerspace, the Visualization Lab, and the Gaming Lab. And I also teach classes within those. And so I often talk with the subject librarians to figure out how we can best develop and deliver various classes for various disciplines. And so those subject librarians are really my number one resource because they know what's happening in all of those different classes. And so I was talking with Jeff McAdams, the engineering librarian, one day, and we decided that it wasn't enough just to kind of casually talk about some ideas, that we wanted something very specific. We wanted to brainstorm so that people could really generate ideas and know what to say. You see here, determine the sticking points or points of concern. There were a lot of them. There were a lot of things that people, including myself, were not necessarily thinking past. Or we were just kind of automatically dismissing them. So Kristen, if you could click, the instruction or the activity that we developed, our two instructions, our two non-negotiables were approach everything with active learning in mind, and then write everything down, even if it sounds impossible, because that one, I don't know if you've had this, but you know, somebody gives me advice and I say, oh yeah, that's a really great idea, thinking in my mind, that's never gonna happen. I'm never gonna do that. But if I would have thought about it later, or if I would have talked about it with someone else, then that could have developed into a really great idea, just using different components that I may not have thought of myself. Next slide. So this is the innovation thinking activity that we did. We did it in 3 parts, and this was a collaboration between the Area 49 librarians and the research and instruction librarians. So the first part was listing, so that we wanted them to list 3 concepts or activities, one that would be really easy to do and kind of obvious, one that their subject instructors have been trying to reinforce, so something that's really important important to that discipline. And then also something that they've had in their mind that seems pretty impossible to reinforce with Area 49, and think mainly kind of makerspace or technologies. Next. Then they shared. After they wrote all of that, they got in groups and they shared it out. They wrote down all of the ideas that they were dismissing so that they could talk about them and kind of reform them. So they were thinking about everything that they were thinking about all of those sticking points for themselves and how they could transform them into something that they could actually suggest to instructors, and instructors would say, oh, you know what, that's a really great idea, let's work on that. The next part is planning. So after they got those ideas, because we all know we go to conferences, we go to meetings, we talk with people, we write down things, and then nothing ever comes from it. So that last step was planning. So write down what you want to do. And that could be developing a lesson plan. That could be coming to me and talking about what the laser cutter actually does and how people could use it in classes, or learning more about gaming, or really whatever it might be. And then they shared their first steps to see if there were commonalities for people to be able to work together. So this is a really great way to kind of make this more concrete and give them space to articulate their ideas and really think about them, so that we could move on for next steps.
Hopefully you feel inspired to potentially collaborate with some of your colleagues and do some brainstorming. Now we're going to have each of our participants share what they've done before in their classes, and we're going to start with Kim Luby.
All right, can I go to the next slide? All right, hello everyone, my name is Kim Luby, and I apologize for screaming in the background. If you've seen me before, I have foster kittens and they are squeaking in my lap, so please don't mind them. So I wanted to talk about my experience with working with first year writing. So I'm the instruction information literacy librarian, and part of my role is to work with the first year writing department, which the students, most of them will take their at least first or second year of school at UNC Charlotte. And this department came to the instruction team, of which I'm a part of, and asked us if we would do some classes on visual literacy. And we all went, well, we know how to do information literacy, but we all kind of paused and went, oh, but what do we do with visual literacy? So that's where we turned to the ACRL standards. You want to go next, please, Kristen? And we looked at the visual literacy competency standards. And if you're not familiar with ACRL, that is the Association of College and Research Libraries, since we throw out lots and lots of acronyms in library conferences. So we went back through that list that Kristen shared earlier and identified a few of them that we thought that we could really work on. And that's one of the ones that I chose here, because these are the ones I felt most comfortable with. So I felt that I could talk about finding and accessing needed images and visual media effectively. I felt comfortable that I could evaluate the source of images, if not totally the images. And I also felt that, as with first year writing, that we could discuss the final competency at the bottom, understanding many of the ethical, legal, social, and economic issues that go around the creation and use of images and visual media, and talk about all of those aspects and using them ethically. So go to the next slide, please. Great. So one example of what I have already done with visual literacy in the class, and what we're trying to do is develop more ideas what we can do. So first we're going to look back and see what we had already done. And I had done this in a few of my classes, talking about Instagram within a different frame. We were talking about how we could use this image to come up with hashtags to help students read a scholarly article, but also realize that Instagram and the images within Instagram are a great example of what a database is. So part of visual literacy, understanding where images are held, talking about how Instagram is essentially just a giant database, and then connecting that back to finding articles and books through the databases that the library provides. Next slide, please. And then another thing that I had already done was talking about teaching copyright. So I use this as an example. So this image here on the right is Leah Michelle from Glee. And this happened to me when I was younger in college. So Leah Michelle looks like a friend of mine. And I posted to Facebook this, an image just like this and tagged my friend in it and just said, hey, is this you? Making a joke. And I got a cease and desist letter from Warner Brothers. So I like to use this as an example to talk about how it is important that images do have copyright and they do need to be cited and share just essentially what's going or what could happen. That's probably the worst thing that's really going to happen to you with using an image like that. But then we talk about the actual citations, how to go through a citation and provide that information so they don't get in trouble. And that leads into my colleague Jenna, and she's going to talk about citations a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Jenna Renalducci, and I'm the Arts and Architecture Librarian. So I'm going to go a little into copyright and some of the things that we're doing. I should say, thankfully, we do have a copyright librarian to the tougher questions. However, in order to introduce the students to concepts we included some of this information in our guides, especially important considering Kim's example. Also, I did once have an art student ask me if they could put someone else's image on a t-shirt and then sell them. I had to explain they couldn't do that. So these guides are really meant to focus on where students are getting the images and how they're using them. This could include how to cite the images, even unique issues like parodies versus reproductions. Next slide. Thanks. So in addition to including this information on our subject guides, I also created an open access images and video guide. This actually started as a LibGuide that was meant to complement our open access week workshop, but I realized there was a long-term need for this information, so I've continued maintaining and even expanding it. So I wanted the guide to provide a clear understanding of what users will find on the listed websites and how they can use them, whether that's public domain, open access, fair use. But also after consulting with librarians working in Area 49 like Beth, we realized that we needed, it'd be useful to have information too about open access videos. So we've expanded that guide even further. Next slide. Thanks. So in helping students to cite the images for their class projects, I talked to them about where they're finding the images. And specifically speaking of citations, the photograph that you see here is actually, it's a Viking style net. That was an example of an image a student found for a class assignment, and she was having trouble citing it. And I should say in this particular class, students are asked to find images of a non-modern net or netting. And this student found this image on a blog and wanted to use it for class, but they were having trouble evaluating it for class use and also figuring out how to even cite it. Because we had doubts, I walked her through the process of reverse image searching, which some of you may be familiar with. In this particular example, I used the website TinEye. And reverse image searching is a great way to evaluate authenticity and also address copyright issues. And I should say that information we include on the guides as well. Oh, great, thanks, next slide. Thank you. So in this particular example, you can see, I should say, well, kind of moving from that, some classes do have to find specific examples of images. However, I actually, as the art and architecture librarian, I like to incorporate images into my library instruction as a starting point for the research process. So because I'm working with art and architecture students, they are very visual, but this can work with multiple disciplines, a variety of disciplines. So for example, this image here by Chuck Close, I was working with students in an art history writing seminar. And this is, I should say, it's a self-portrait by Chuck Close. It worked well because there were students interested in photography in this particular class. We found this image actually in the database art store. So just like finding a book and then looking at the subject headings or articles and the attached subjects, I encourage students to find the search terms in the image metadata here, like for example, the artist's name, the term self-portrait, even daguerreotype, as jumping off points for them. And next slide. Yeah, thanks. So I incorporated this particular example into instruction, and we actually, the students and I created a concept map based on the main idea from the metadata, specifically the artist's name. You can see a variety of the options here as I walk the students through. We tested some of these terms in the catalog and the databases. Also, this in-class brainstorming in the catalog led to some search terms the students wouldn't have thought about or even known about. For example, face and art as a possible subject term, not initially one I would have thought of either. So that's why I find these exercises very useful kind of starting out in library instruction with the students. Next slide. And this is just a quick overview that I showed the students to kind of see the path from, say, finding an image, breaking down the concepts, and then really digging in and finding library sources about the topic. And I like to think of it as providing a different approach to the research process. Next slide. Oh, next slide, Krista. Yeah, thanks. So in addition, that was kind of, I showed you the more traditional concept mapping with the bubbles and the arrows. But I also like to use some of the interactive online tools like ThingLink. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ThingLink, it lets you annotate an image. You can list possible search terms, you can link to resources, make connections to other images. I like to think of it as a fun, kind of easy way to help students approach their research topics. I know some of my colleagues have used it in classes as well. In this particular example that I have up here, I used this with a Northern Renaissance art history class. And we used it to list possible search terms, again, like that other example with Chuck Close, getting into things like religious iconography, the art-donor relationship, all again as possible search terms. But we also linked them to some of the library resources like books and articles that seemed relevant, websites, videos. It was a great way to kind of also make connections to other related images as well. And next slide. Thanks. Of course, brainstorming by reading an image can take on different levels of research. This particular image here is a World War II war poster used as propaganda to encourage people to buy war bonds. And I've used this example in both library instruction and individual classes, but also workshops to get students thinking about images on a deeper level. So just like my examples with brainstorming search terms, we can research an image like this one, asking a variety of questions like where does the image come from, who created it, what is its purpose, how does it make you feel, how is it related to other images or texts. And you'll notice that these are very similar questions when we're walking through students evaluating sources. So again, there is a lot of overlap with what you're already doing, and a lot of those are transferable to visual literacy. So now I'm going to hand it over to Beth, who's going to talk about creating visual arguments.
Okay, so this starts that kind of advanced part of visual literacy that Kristen was talking about, being able to use the creation process for students to develop their own ideas through visuals. We're seeing, just like with first year writing that Kim was talking about, we're seeing a lot of genre-based projects, so articulating your ideas not in a traditional paper, but in something else that you create. So this was a class with Kim, Kristen, and two of our other colleagues, Natalie Ornap, the humanities librarian, and Thomas Crocker, the technology and multimedia production coordinator for Area 49. And just like the ThingLink that Jenna showed, students are starting to create their own visuals. They can use all of these programs as well. So this class, students researched and found information about their topics and figured out what they wanted to convey, the ideas that they wanted to convey from them, and conveyed them in visuals. So you can read the steps to the right, but basically librarians acted as technology facilitators, and they helped with how to use the technology in innovative ways, and also acted as facilitators for peer review and were resources for idea development. So this was a pretty dynamic class. There's way too much content in here to talk about in the few minutes that we have today. But I do want to go to the next one, the next slide. And this is, so I show students examples also that they think may be impossible for them to create because it gives them ideas. And I also break down how easy it is to do these things, because a lot of students don't know how to do these things. They need help with the technology, they need help with the making. And so that's what we're there for in Area 49. And the more that students understand about visual literacy, the better they can, one, develop their own arguments. They can also offer points of criticism. So if they've developed their own, they're better equipped to criticize others. And then they can also appreciate missed opportunities. And this is the example that I use all the time, and I love it so much. First one, there we go. So this is, if you've ever seen the painting Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, this is a recreation that George Peasley created using Google Tilt Brush. You can find this at poly.google.com. And Google Tilt Brush is basically painting, VR painting. So it's Microsoft Paint in a virtual unlimited space with movable brushes, and you can walk all around it, and you can create 3D worlds practically. So I show them this example, and a lot of people have seen it. If they haven't, then I tell them that the guy whose back is to us, whose face we can't see, is usually the one that's most talked about. People might think that it's Edward Hopper himself. People might think all kinds of things. But if we take a look, we can do the next one. So this person has recreated practically every detail. You look at this painting and you look at this Google Tilt Brush version, and my goodness, like, this person spent so much time on this. But I tell them, if you're using something like this, you can if you want to put a certain idea out about who the guy is whose back is to us, you could recreate this entire thing. You can, you could possibly even put a face to this guy to create that argument, to make that argument so that people understand something more about this painting than just what was in there before. So then I zoom in. And this is the part that students always just crack up about, because I tell them, this person dropped the ball on this. They did not make a visual argument. Instead, they decided to draw this random, not artistic, or less technically proficient, I suppose, smiley face on this guy, right? So students, even though this is, the point where everybody laughs in the class, they really get it. It really drives it home. They could have taken this, they could have added to it, and they could have developed an argument for themselves. Right. Next slide. Randy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Beam. I'm the instruction archivist at Adkins Library. So Beth and I are going to talk about a collaboration that we started the first year that I came to UNC Charlotte. And Image, Beth did a great job at sort of laying out how you can do, have students really use it as a creation, inspiration. But they can also work as a collaboration connector. So for this collaboration, it was with Beth, Natalie Ornat, our humanities librarian, and Tiffany Morin, the professor and coordinator for the English learning community. The English learning community is really a small group of incoming first-year students. They get their English prereq really out of the way, and then they do a lot of activities outside, so they sort of create their own little cohort. I met with her the summer that I started, and we got to talking because they always pick out one book every semester that they try to focus on, and so she was going to have them try to do a parallel with Alice in Wonderland, and we have a few older copies of that. And I said, well, why don't you have them come in and look at, we have an Alice in Wonderland pop-up book, and I said it'd be really cool if you could have them make a pop-up book as their final assessment, because she was still like throwing ideas around. And she said, do you know how to do that? And I, of course, the first 3 months that you work somewhere, you're like, yeah, totally, I'll figure it out. And that's where Beth comes in just a minute. But the pop-up books are held in special collections. So there were 2 sessions with me. There was one about the history of the university so they could see their place in the university. And then they did come up for the pop-up books just to get them a little more comfortable with special collections. They use those as examples. And some of our pop-up books are rare copies. In the 1960s, pop-up books became really popular. And then others are held in special collections due to their really detailed construction. If anybody's ever been a children's librarian, you know that pop-up books are, they're very well loved, which means that usually they're used quite a bit. So you sort of have to go through and, you know, keep changing it up. And we really use those pop-up books as a jumping off point for student inspiration. So I'll send it back over to Beth because she actually knows how to make pop-ups.
So this project was really for them to, you know, they saw the pop-up books and then they were able to make their own. And, you know, Tiffany said, well, I have no experience making pop-ups. Do you know how to do that? I said, well, of course, I make everything. So I, you know, reviewed all of the different videos to make sure that I knew more about the different pop-ups. We have a resources slide at the very end of this presentation that you can go to, and I have a LibGuide for a few of the making things that I've been talking about. But after they went to special collections, they came to the makerspace and I showed them how to use the laser cutter so that they could cut their own more sturdy laser cut cardboard covers, and they could laser engrave them as well. And then I also gave them instruction in manipulating paper for pop-ups. That went really well because they were all intimidated at first. They're like, I've never made a pop-up book. I don't know what to do. So we started out and they really understood at the end how to start manipulating that paper. On the left, you'll see just the basic V-fold there. And there is a link to that exact location in the video for it. But there's the basic V-fold, and a lot of them use just that. But a lot of them also used things that were more complicated, like this pop-up flower situation that is definitely advanced, and also the one on the right, which is just a flap so that they can hide something at first, and then the reader needs to move something out of the way to see the next thing. We also talked, so it wasn't just instruction about manipulating the paper, it was also talking about how to get their ideas to literally pop up off of the page. So what was the most important idea that they wanted their readers to get across? So for example, if they had had an experience that was really scary for them, and let's say it was, you know, a person who had scared them, then maybe they would want that person's face, sorry if this is terrifying, but this person's face to pop up off of the page, maybe even kind of do a swirl pop up. And all of these things, all of these tech things that I'm talking about, even with the Google Tilt Brush, the VR stuff, and all of these making ideas, they're easy if you know what you're doing. So if you have a resource such as the librarians who work in the spaces for these things, then it's a lot easier, and it's a lot less intimidating for students to be able to do this. I wish that I would be able to show you some of the amazing things that they came up with, but they are currently physically in our makerspace that I cannot currently get in. So if you would like to see any of those examples in, I don't know, a month or some time, just email me and I'll email you when I can physically access those again.
Oh, back to me again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use historical images in the archives. So we really use them as a way to analyze missing records. That's how I use it in class. And I know that lots of folks are really well versed in the ACRL framework, but the SAA and the RBMS, so Rare Books and Manuscript section of the ACRL, came up with their own guidelines for primary source literacy. And it's really three concepts that I focus on when I use images in the archives. So that includes critically evaluate the perspective of the creators of a primary source, situate a primary source in context by applying knowledge about the time and culture in which it was created, and identify and consider the reasons for silences, gaps, contradictions, or evidence of power relationships in the documentary records. So historical images can act as a visual representation of who is lost in the traditional narrative of the past. So at Atkins Library, we try to collect Charlotte-based records. So, you know, anybody from Harry Golden's papers, who's a famous writer here, to the mayor of Charlotte, to local activists. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 different activities that allow for students to think critically at the beginning of class and really act as a way for students to get comfortable with asking questions of primary sources, but also get some of those jitters out when you do discussion-based classes. And these two sets of images, so the colored pages that you see, those are from a Transsensual Alliance newsletter from the Sue Henry Papers, which was a local transgender organization in the early 90s. And then that map is it's a 1940s map of Charlotte. And I use that a lot for classes that focus on redlining. Next slide, Kristen. Thank you. Okay, so the first activity, presentation of history. So I always try to do, I use this usually for my, to get them to think of the narrative of who is missing. So I use this first activity a lot with African American history courses, colonial American history courses, and American history pre-1865. So I really present the students, we do an open forum discussion so they get really used to talking to each other in class. And so I say, okay, so you are at a museum and you see this painting, and so we're going to talk about this painting. And I start with the first question. So what do you see in this painting? Where do you think this painting is set in the world? What do you think this man does for a living? What hobbies do you think he has? And if you saw this painting in a museum, what do you think would be on the exhibit label? And they always have really great answers. A lot of students, I mean, it's one, whenever you have primary sources, you want students to really start stating the obvious, because that's how we get to research questions. And I actually saw this painting at the University of Michigan Art Museum, and I have them answer these questions, and then I tell them the story of the painting. So this painting, this man is not particularly famous for any reason. The painter is John Hoffner, and this is a portrait of Sir Foster Cunliffe. However, the painting is important because Sir Foster Cunliffe was a prominent nobleman in the late 1700s, but his family actually made their fortune. His grandfather was one of the most successful slave traders of the 1700s. He helped set up ports in Virginia, in America, and the University of Michigan does a really great job with presenting that information. So that way then to the students, we have a larger discussion around like, why do you think this man, why does he not present himself as that, is why that, how he got his fortune. And then we also talk about too, like, what are the further implications in terms of how English society viewed slavery during this time period. And then I always ask the final question, which is, who else is missing from this narrative? So who else are we missing? And lots of times students always bring up the enslaved people. Sometimes they bring up women, so you never see a woman in this. And you really can't tell it from this slide, but there is like a little manor house in the back. So students sometimes will bring up servants as well. So who's you know, who's working in the household for him, things like that. So there are a bunch of really great questions that get students to think about who is missing, but how is history presented to them. Next slide, please. And then this is the other activity that I do a lot. So this activity with the class starts with them standing around a large map of the Carolinas from 1775. I try to take these photos with my phone. This map is huge. It covers 3 bookcases in our reading room, and it's immobile. You can't move it because it's so big. So it sits in a really nice preserved box on the corner of the reading room. I always do this as sort of like a bell ringer activity, if you will, to get students comfortable with the reading room. Reading rooms are always very imposing for students, so I always say we're going to take a field trip, and they always are like, whatever. So then they hop over to we come around to the map, and it's very large. I mean, it is our oldest map that we have. So I always ask them, I always say, no question is too stupid when it comes to primary documents. So what do you all see on this map? What are some of the cities that you see? Is there anything familiar that you see on this map? Who had access to this land during this time period? What country created this map? And whose story is not being told in this map? As you can see, it's a really detailed, it's a very detailed map of North Carolina and South Carolina. There is a part of Georgia where Georgia is classified as pleasant good land. So we talk about this map being used as a tool of propaganda in 1775. So them telling people, you know, come here, there's really good farming land. And then I also say, like, who would have lived here besides the people who created this map? So they do have labels for the Cherokee people. So the indigenous people who had moved in to the Appalachian Mountains. And then there are a few different little spots that they know, because in some ways the map is very familiar, but then it's also very foreign. And then I also have students too talk about, like, who else is missing, and we always talk about, I always make sure to point out that and it's great that the Native people do have labels on this map. However, you're still missing the story of the enslaved people. So what do maps tell you about who wins in terms of land? And you can also do this as a compare and contrast activity with another map. And I've done this I usually use the map for a lot of different classes just to get them thinking. But I use this activity with a variety of different classes. When you're talking about gender studies, sometimes I do it for a feminist cartography class, and then I've also done it for different geography classes. But the colorful map that you see there in that photograph, that is a facsimile of a French map from the 1600s. So we usually go through the same style. What looks familiar to you? What doesn't look familiar to you? What does this tell you about the 1775 map, and what does this tell you about America? And students, probably the funniest thing is that students always notice that for some reason, the way the French drew Florida, there's just like a huge break of just water in the middle of it, which is not true. And then if you get any students from the Midwest, Michigan is not a mitten, it's just like a huge blob in the middle of the lakes, the Great Lakes. So yeah, so those are the ways that archives can use visual images to sort of try to get students to think about the gaps that are missing in our records.
We've just shared a lot of ways that we have approached visual literacy in classes in the past. And as we all know, we are in some different and difficult times right now, and we're dealing with a lot of things that we may not have ever had to deal with before, like a global pandemic, and some things like racial injustice and racism, some issues that we just haven't dealt with properly as a country before. So as we deal with these times, we kind of have two questions in mind going forward that we're thinking about how this will change the way that we might present visual literacy in our classrooms. We don't have full answers to these, and they're definitely evolving and changing over time. But these are two things that we're thinking about. In relation to the first question, Randy talked about some of those missing stories in the archival record, and we can see that throughout different types of images. Prior to social media, there were a lot of groups and individuals that we might not have heard very much from, and we certainly get more input from them thanks to different platforms where people can share pictures and art that they've created. As we hear these from these different voices and different segments of society, we want students to think critically about the images that they are coming across in different mediums. And we also want them to recognize their potential role in creating images and dealing with conversations around challenging topics. So we want to empower them to be able to do that well and critically. And then we're also thinking about how we're going to adapt some of our approaches to the online environment. We're definitely more physically distant than we used to be in the past. And some things like looking at images and brainstorming search terms from an image might translate really well into an online environment. Some things like a virtual reality version of a an artwork and trying to get into a VR headset to create a piece of art is more challenging to do at home. So we are thinking about how to approach these changing environments, and we are also talking to each other, to our faculty members that we work with, trying to come up with new and innovative ways to handle these different topics. So our final couple of slides are some resources that we've created and our contact information there. And then we have one additional slide after this that has some other resources from other people that other people have created. And we had someone in our session share a link to a LibGuide earlier around visual literacy. So we have just a few minutes left. We'd love to answer any questions if you all have them. And we'll definitely share our slides after this presentation so that you'll be able to click on all these resources that we've shared. And I'll give you all a moment to go ahead and share questions in the chat, or if you'd like to share a question using your mic, you're more than welcome to unmute and do that. But I'll also pose a question to you all to think about if you'd like to react. So we shared some of our approaches, and there were definitely some people in here who said that they weren't familiar with visual literacy. They've never thought about how they would teach it or how they would talk about it. And I'd like to know if those folks feel like they have a little bit of a better understanding about what visual literacy is and how they could approach that subject. And then those of you who have already taught in this area some, do you feel like you've gotten any new ideas off of us, or do you have any ideas or approaches that you've used that we have not talked about today? Great, and it sounds like folks feel like they have a better grasp of things, that you've come up with some new ideas. That's great. And we're lucky, as I said, at Atkins Library. We're big on collaboration. We also have a lot of different folks to work with. We have our innovative technology spaces in Area 49 and a lot of subject librarians. So we have a lot of expertise that we can pull from. So if you happen to be at a smaller institution where you don't have that type of expertise, I'll jump back to this slide here to give you all our email addresses again. And you can feel free to always reach out to us if you have a question about the way that we've handled things. Great, thanks you all. I hope that this was enjoyable for everybody. We just have a minute left, so we'll stick around if anyone has any questions, any last minute questions or anything that you want to ask. We'll be here for just another minute or two.